The oceans will roar, the mountains will bow to the name of the Lord. He is our God, He will be praised. The idols will fall, the strongholds will break, every weapon that forms will shatter and fail. He is our God, He is our faith. Praise is the highway to the throne of God. Praise is the highway to the heart of God. Praise is the highway to the move of God. Oh, revival will come. Revival will come. The church will awake. His anthem will drown all other refrains. He is our song, and He forever reigns. He reigns. Praise is the highway to the throne of God. Praise is the highway to the heart of God. Praise is the highway to the move of God. Lift you up, lift up your head, fling wide the gates, break down the walls with a shout of praise. Lift up your voice, forever down. Oh, sing like thunder, His praise is loud. Lift up your head, fling wide the gates, break down the walls with a shout of praise. Lift up your voice, forever down. Oh, sing like thunder, His praise is loud. Praise is the highway, sing it. To the throne of God. Praise is the highway to the heart of God. Praise is the highway to the move of God. Sing it again, every voice. Praise is the highway. Praise is the highway to the heart of God. Praise is the highway to the move of God. Lift up your head, fling wide the gates.
Welcome to Grove Counseling. Will you stand and worship with me from wherever you are? I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. The weapon may be formed, but it won't prosper. And when the darkness falls, it won't prevail. The God I serve knows only how to triumph. Oh, my God will never fail. Oh, my God will never fail. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Oh. There's power in the mighty name of Jesus. And every war he wages, he will win. And I'm not backing down from any giant. I know how this story ends. Yes, I know how this story ends. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Oh, gonna worship our way through this battle. Gonna worship our way through this battle. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turned it for good. You turned it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turned it for good. You turned it for good. Oh, you take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil, and you turn it for good. You turned it for good. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. Oh, the battle belongs to you, Lord. Oh. of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called my name. I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I am surrounded by the arms of a Father. I am surrounded by songs of deliverance. We've been liberated from our bondage. We're the sons and the daughters. Let us sing our freedom. Oh, 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 oh. You split the sea so I could walk right through it. My fears are drowned in perfect love. You rescued me so I could stand and sing. I am a child of God. I am a child of God. One more time. I am a child of God. Will you bow your heads and pray with me? Dear God, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your glorious, glorious name. Thank you for being with us and taking every fear away, because you've wiped every single fear that we have away. Lord, thank you for being you, for healing us, for just being with us whenever we need you. You're always by our side. You're always providing for us. In your name we pray. Amen.
Well, welcome back to Grove Counseling. We're glad you could join us this evening wherever it is you're watching. Thanks for being here. And we have been just taking our time through all this, dealing with some mental health issues, dealing with some stuff that maybe is hard to talk about. And last week we started a series on the 5 stages of grief, and we talked about denial. And this week we're going to talk about anger. And so that's a really bad segue, but I invited my wife to come here to chat with me a little bit, do a little interview. Some people have never met my wife, so we have an ongoing joke that she's like the Loch Ness Monster. She's a unicorn. She's this mythical creature, but in fact, she's my better half. And Rachel, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So we get to go on these awesome night walks every single night, and I think that's been one of my favorite parts of this quarantine is just getting that intentional time to talk with you every night. And we've processed a lot of this stuff together.
Yeah, pretty much every talk. We've
Yeah.
kind of gone through ups and downs and all of it
So
several times.
That's been really, really helpful for me and just good for our marriage, I think, to talk through these things. And so when it comes to this concept of anger being one of the stages of grief, and anyone that I've met in our Celebrate Recovery ministry, I introduce myself as Matt. I'm somebody that is definitely a child of God, but I struggle with anger. And so anger is always the thing that I bring up. And so we're familiar with talking about anger, but it's usually talking about my anger, which is interesting. But for you, I'm just curious. Well, I'm not, because I know the answer, but they're probably curious. What does anger look like for you?
This was a really good question. And I'll be honest, on Saturday for our night walk, Matt started begging me a little bit to come and talk here. And I'm like, of every subject, anger's the worst one. I can't relate to it, which all of us can relate to it. But when I'm thinking in terms of extremes, I'm like, that's not my thing. And then as we were talking, that's when I began to quickly realize, like, you had recognized in me right away. You're like, well, I can recognize your anger. It's irritability. And so the more I started processing it, I realized right away my outward expression of anger would be irritability. I'm just kind of grumpy or just easily irked by things around me. And typically, I don't know what I'm angry at. I don't even know that it's there. Usually, it can even go on for days where I'm just kind of grumpy before I recognize it. So that's one way that it will show up. But then after we had talked, it was so funny. 3 a.m, I sit up and I almost woke you up to tell you I have anger, because I realized at 3 a.m. that my anger actually goes inward and it goes towards myself. And so because we had been talking about the sub-concepts of where you'll actually see anger manifest, and it was more along the lines of guilt and what was the other one?
Maybe blame.
Yeah, blame. So I will turn those typically on myself. And I have a lot of ways where I have guilt or blame that will go onto myself. And it's something I've been working on for a while. And a big part of what it will usually look like is me expecting some level of perfection over something or wanting some sort of a controllable outcome. Obviously, we live in a life where you really can't get either of those, especially all the time. So that is really where anger will manifest in me, is really being angry at myself or just holding myself to an impossible standard. And even when you're looking in terms of grief, typically my approach to grief, even when I was going through it with extremes, it was very clinical. I'm like, oh, I'm on step 3 now, and I can recognize it. But actually living through it and allowing myself to feel it, that was a completely different ballgame.
That's really good. And I think a lot of times we think of anger looking at just this like explosion outward or at someone or at something, but you've realized that anger actually, for you, it's internalized anger. That could be you kind of punishing yourself for stuff. And you had mentioned to me too, when it has been there a long time, it can even take the form of anxiety for you.
Yeah, that's the big one. Usually I won't know that it's there until I'm feeling really anxious all the time. And then when I'm going, why am I feeling anxious? And we had talked about this. I'm not very good about recognizing what I'm feeling unless I actually stop, go away, just like how Jesus would go away. And I would have to really process, and I would have to really go, what am I feeling right now? And start bringing things to the surface and allowing myself to feel them. And then that's when I started realizing there's a very clear pattern here. And anxiety is actually the last step of it, where I thought that was the first step. But really what was happening is there's some level of guilt, blame, fear, anger. Something is trickling back that I've been ignoring for some length of time. And I'm just seeing it through anxiety. Which is kind of the end warning for me. Wow.
So we've been married now for almost 13 years. And we were talking about how you've seen, just when it comes to how you process anger, how that's actually changed through the years, probably for both of us. But how have you seen just how you process anger? How have you seen that change and adapt as you've grown?
That's a good question. Yeah. in the beginning, my idea of anger, it falls into, I think, what a lot of Christians have as anger is, oh no, this is bad. I can't feel this. How do I make it go away? I stuff it down deep, fast, and I don't think about it. So of course that never works, and it's going to spiral, and it's going to get bigger and bigger. And one of the things that I've realized is letting go of control. That's a big one. And prayer is a big one. You know, as you get to know God, you realize you can let go of more and more, and God is there. And a big thing too is learning how to not be, for me, not be afraid of not being in control. Am I wording that right? I think so. And one of the big thoughts that really helped me was whether I succeed or whether I fail, God is there.
Yeah.
Either way. So if I fail, he will be there to get me picked up back on the right track. And if I succeed, he's there too to guide me to the next step. And there's, you know, a lot of that punishment, a lot of that fear, a lot of this, oh, it has to be right. It has to be perfect. I can't make a mistake. All of that is pressure I'm putting on myself. And even in terms of grief, where it's like, I can get through this, I'm going to power through it. You know, we all have different ways that, and they're good. They're coping mechanisms. It's good. It's okay to pour yourself into exercise. It's okay to pour yourself into work at times. But if you're just habitually distracting yourself and never processing what you're avoiding, it's going to manifest in an ugly way one day. And so I think that's something I've learned a lot over these years was originally my coping mechanism was really just really good at distraction and really good at being okay. But then I would have these sideways outbursts, whether it's anxiety, whatever. And the last 2 years is when I've been really realizing that there's a hidden element maybe. And that is in like the mental health, which is like, what are my thoughts? Where's my thoughts going? Where's my brain going right now? And instead of maybe punishing myself or going, no, you can't have these thoughts. You can't be angry. What are you doing? You can't have guilt, stuff like that. Allowing myself to fully feel it, process it. And then even further, another step was getting myself to a healthy place with that, because it's one thing to feel it and go, oh, great, now I'm angry again. I'm going to go for a walk, you know, or I have so much anxiety now. I don't know how to handle this situation. And it's okay to do those things. Yoga, all that stuff. It's one of my favorite things to do. But another piece I had to learn was really to go, God, I don't know what to do with this. And I am giving this to you today. And a lot of times that was a daily process, especially if you're in the thick of grief. It's one thing to revisit it, if you will, like, 5 years later, oh, wow, look, I'm brought back to something and I really should work through these emotions. It's quite another when a tragedy or, for CR example, a relapse, something happened and it is so alive and it is so painful that, sometimes you need more than just that one little prayer for that day. Right. You need a lot. And, so that's one of those things, not being afraid to go back and not being afraid to say, okay, it's time to feel what I need to feel right now. And it's okay to feel that. And then the other big part of going for me is, what can I do? What are my healthy steps with this now that it's here? Giving it to God. Of course, Bible verses are very helpful. But really, the biggest thing I've found is time heals. God heals us in time. And he heals our hearts in time. And there will be things where I didn't know how to get over it myself, but all of a sudden, 3 months later of giving it to the Lord, all of a sudden I'm going, oh, wow, I'm actually doing better here. It's, of course, no work of my own. I could have never done that. But once again, putting pressure on myself to say, for example, okay, let's process through this so it never happens again. That's not healthy. Because you'll face it. If you think you're not going to face that again, God will show you a whole new way to make you face the same thing in a different way where he knows you're going to fail, just so you can get over your pride.
That's not up to you.
Right.
Yeah.
So those were
That's good. And, we're going to talk in a minute about kind of, like you said, these subcategories of anger, how they can manifest themselves. Yeah. And one is guilt. And guilt is something that you touched on a little bit a moment ago, of how you can almost feel guilty for not maybe, for still having anger that you should have dealt with, or for feeling it again when you thought you got over it. I think there's a level where when we deal with anger, and we actually deal with anger, which is rare for some of us to actually
Yeah.
process it.
I think
where
as a society, it's rare.
it is. And I think
And it's seen as powerful.
yeah,
at times.
Yeah. And I think the more that we get through anger, we almost have a little bit of muscle memory. Okay, I can get through this and not just push it away or
Right.
explode it out or sideways, like you said. But when it comes to guilt, right, that's something that can definitely kind of be I guess, a subcategory of anger. How have you dealt with feeling guilty in your life and in your process of grief?
That one, kind of like anger, that one's a tough one because I can think of so many examples where it would show up. And once again, my knee-jerk reaction is to stuff it down and go back into Rachel is fine mode. And if I'm being honest with myself, I do have to bring that to the forefront. So, areas of guilt.
We had talked last night about kind of that idea of redirecting some of that
That's right.
that mindset that's causing you to not let go and not
Yeah.
forgive yourself and
Yeah.
get out of those negative spirals.
Yeah. Thank you for that reminder. Yeah, that was the big one where when it comes to guilt, that kind of how I was saying before with the anger, redirecting it.
Not avoiding it,
Right.
just redirecting it.
Redirecting it. Yeah. And so I can think of different examples where, I think one of the biggest ones for me with guilt that really helped me over the years is, and this works for anger, works for anything else, but realistically, if I'm looking at the situation that I'm facing, and I'm a mom, so I kind of get to cheat with that one, I get to go, how would I want my kids to be treated in this moment? How would I want to parent them in this moment? And that answer is always grace and forgiveness. And, there's wisdom to be had there too, and life lessons and all that. And then the other part of guilt, so I'll look at that and I'll process guilt through that way. Because a lot of times I'm going, why would I ever make myself feel guilty? If I'm being logical, why would I make myself feel guilty for that? Even if it was something I did screw up on, we all screw up. And then the other part of it is, I'll sometimes ask myself, what is the thing I'm longing to hear right now? And a lot of times that is, I want to be forgiven. I don't want this held over my head. If I screwed up, if I whatever, I want to be able to take a breath and move on. And giving myself that grace that essentially I almost want from other people, that I do receive from other people, but for some reason don't give it to myself. That's the other big step that I'll actually kind of ask myself. And then it helps to redirect my brain and my thought process. So instead of being angry at something, angry at a mistake, angry at something I can't control, now I'm able to look at it and instead go, this is a learning experience. This was a great thing that happened and I don't need to be afraid of it. And there's much to learn from it and grow from it and grace to be had from it. But when I can get to that process of essentially forgiving myself, it really does free up a lot of that guilt.
Yeah.
What was the quote that you had told me that a friend sent you?
Yeah, that kind of the level that when we look at our anger, right, also look at your expectation, your level of expectation.
Yeah.
And sometimes you hold...
Frustration is your level of expectation. It was something
yeah,
like that.
Frustration, right. Our frustration is connected to our expectation.
Yeah. And when you told me that hit me perfectly. I'm like, okay, that is spot on. Like what if I was trying to give somebody advice into Rachel's head, that would be it. And so that was the perfect way to word it, with too perfectionist of standards, with too high of expectations. You constantly fail. You constantly disappoint yourself. You're constantly giving yourself a reason to be angry. And there's just no box for forgiveness.
That's
in there.
awesome.
Yeah.
And that being said, right, that's something you would say to somebody that's struggling with this. And so that's kind of where I want to end our conversation today, is just to ask you, like, what advice would you give someone that's working on actually letting go of their anger and moving past it? Like, they've never actually let it go before. They've never moved past it. It's always been this thing they almost play, they play tag with. They hide from it. They don't
Yeah.
actually deal with it. So
Yeah.
what is something, you talked about tracking your thoughts, and I thought that was a really good practical thing they can do.
Yeah, that's the big one. That's one that I have found to be really, really helpful for myself, because like you said, I feel like a lot of us, we know what the right thing to do is, so we actually run and hide from those parts of us that are bad. And that's what we tell ourselves, that's bad. And of course, yeah, maybe it isn't good, but when we're running and hiding from these parts of ourselves and we're not addressing it, it just stays there and it never leaves. And so something I started a year ago was tracking my thoughts. So for me, I don't process through, like I said, I don't recognize my own emotions very well. I have to actually take effort to do it, to see what I'm feeling. So for me, that's getting away from the kids, getting away from the noise and sitting there. And usually I'll just sit in silence with God. And I just start with that. And then I just start breathing. And for me, I need to go the whole nine. I start relaxing myself from head to toe, recognizing what is my body feeling right now. And sometimes even by tracking my body feelings, like my neck is the Rachel wants her way and she's not having it, or she's worried about something spot. So when it's hurting, I'm typically stressed about something. And even though my body is telling me I'm fine, my brain's saying I'm fine, this spot of my neck is going, what's going on? So that's one I can usually track. But then mentally too, a big one, and this one is very foreign. I've been doing it for about a year now, so it's not as difficult anymore, but letting my brain just think and don't stop it and don't judge myself or correct myself. Just follow where the thoughts go. And so, for example, we could look at anger. We could look at guilt, one of those emotions. Like if I'm feeling it, let's say guilty. I'm feeling guilty about something. I'll sit there and just keep thinking about that emotion and let my brain kind of go. And what blows my mind is it usually goes back to something. And let's say, like, usually it's something in the past that I'm trying to avoid, whether it was a mistake or whether it was a painful lesson learned. So oftentimes what's happening is it's me going, I don't want to repeat that mistake again. I don't want to be there again. And so I'm really, it's massive avoidance in some ways. And so that tracking the thoughts was something that really changed my ability to recognize not only the emotion I was feeling, but where it was coming from, where the origin was. And then, like how I was saying, that ability to kind of forgive yourself, that is where instead of, I would look at that situation and instead of seeing it, because like my knee jerk might be panic or to go, nope, we're not letting that happen again. And instead to look at that and go, that was a 19-year-old girl that faced a lot of hard challenges. And she did really good with what she had. And there is wisdom to be found there. And just like today, 34, just like today, what if I make another mistake? I have the wisdom that I have, and I'm 34, and it's okay if I make that mistake. And I can keep going from here. And and so there's so much freedom in forgiving yourself, because once I was able to reassess the situation from the past, it made it so much easier for the future to not be as afraid. The other piece of advice that I would give, and it's very similar to kind of the tracking your thoughts, was one of our fellow pastors' wives, Julie Swanson. She told a story, and the way I remember the story is the phrase "one cup at a time." And so when she was going through some really hard stuff, she would take a cup of coffee out in the morning, coffee, Bible, sit in a chair outside, away from the kids, away from the life, and sit there, and she would force herself to pray through these hard topics, these hard feelings that she doesn't want to feel. So once again, you're bringing them up to the surface, right? And do that for 1 cup of coffee every day. Even on the days when, well, maybe half that cup of coffee gets dumped out into the flowers, you still gave it half a cup of coffee that day. It was just too painful to do anymore. And that one was so pivotal to me, because mine wasn't fully the same, but it was very similar. And that was such a good analogy, that 1 cup of coffee. I'm like, that's not much time out of our day to allow ourselves to feel especially when things are out of place in our own life or in our own mind. We're not feeling comfortable in our own skin and we don't know why. This gives us one little cup of coffee to every day go through a little bit and figure out what is going on under the surface that I don't know about. So, and the final piece to it would be, for me, I wanted to always make sure I didn't end it on a highly negative thought process. I don't want to walk away from these moments. Like, there were moments when I needed to just feel what I'm feeling and say, I feel better now. But then there was times when I would walk away and say, no, I am still agitated. I am still shaky. I am still, for whatever reason, I'm not right now. And those are the moments where I really would turn those heavily to prayer. And those are the moments I really had Bible verses that I would need to cling to. And that mental thought process, I would always go back to all of God's provisions that he had, whether in my life or in the Bible. And I would always remind myself, God provides here, and I don't need to be afraid. And so it was an active process for me to let go and pray for that peace to come. And then heavily too, that's when I would do things like a walk, yoga, intentional things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that was an active component of it. But if I just heavily rely on the active component of it, everything stays under the surface.
So you're telling me if you just avoid feeling your emotions, it doesn't naturally go away?
It works perfectly. 10 years ago, Rachel would say, it works perfectly. Everything is fine. We're all fine.
Oh, well, thank you so much for getting out of your comfort zone and joining me here today. And
You're
seriously,
welcome.
Now everyone sees why I'm
real.
so awesome. It's because of you.
There's proof. There really is a wife.
Well, thank you.
I'm not made up and I'm not paid.
Thank you so
here.
much. Thank you.
Bye.
Well, that was really fun. It was, for me, it's a little nerve-wracking having my wife come, but I was more nervous for her than anything. But that was a really good conversation, and that's what we're all about here, is having the conversations that need to be had that are maybe not comfortable. And as we process through the stages of grief, we find ourselves in stage 2. And again, there's a million ways to kind of quantify the stages of grief. Some give it a 5-stage approach, others 7, others 8, others 10. But we're looking at the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief. We looked at denial, and now we're looking at anger. In each of these stages, there are sub kind of words or feelings that go along or these different bigger topics can manifest themselves in. And so anger is our big word. We're going to look at the different sub manifestations of anger and what it looks like. As I said earlier, my reason for coming to CR is anger when we have CR. And I struggle with anger. I have my whole life, but for too often I've hid from it. I've felt like this is this thing I can't let out or else it'll expose me. It'll sink me. It'll tear me apart or it'll hurt the people I love. And a level anger can do those things, but it's also an emotion that's not wrong. It's natural. And we have to learn how to process it and move through it rather than bottle it up and avoid it. And so anger is something that can be really challenging to tackle. My first thought tonight is that anger, what actually it is. Anger is a reaction to change that we can't quantify. When there's something in our life that we didn't expect, we didn't want, we didn't see coming, we flail and we try to put a word on it. We try to somehow quantify it. And anger is one way that can show itself. I used to think that the anger in the context of grief is only if you're grieving something huge. I talked about last week, sometimes there are these big markers of grief, a major loss, losing a job, a big life change, those kind of things. But in reality, we grieve things on the daily basis on a much smaller level. And I think that's what anger actually is. These little mini bursts of grief. Realizing you didn't, get the job you wanted. So you're angry and you punch a wall. Like, don't do that. Obviously not healthy. But that's where that's coming from. something you can't control, something you're upset about, something you're feeling injustice about even, right? That's kind of where anger comes from. Grieving a lack of control, grieving something not going our way, grieving disappointing news or something shocking. That's how anger can look on the daily basis. Anger, again, in and of itself, isn't bad, but if it goes unattended and undealt with, it can become bad. The Bible talks about anger a lot. It's one of those topics that you can find verses for all over the place, many of which are found in the Psalms and Proverbs. But Ephesians 4 says it this way: in your anger, don't sin. It's making a specific difference between anger and sin. Anger is not sin, but when you're angry, don't sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice. So in your anger, don't sin. Feel it, process it, move past it, but don't sin in it, right? That's our challenge. That's what God is calling us to do. That part about not letting the sun go down on your anger, I've used that often in marriage counseling. I've used that verse to remind people, hey, if you're angry at one another, don't go to bed angry. Talk it out and get to a better place before the sun goes down. But and that's definitely one application of this verse. But another way to look at it is don't let a whole lot of time go by without processing your anger. You see, sometimes we're not angry at a person, we're angry at a thing. We're angry at an event. We're angry at a circumstance. That's usually the form my anger takes. It's just kind of just explodes out of me at nothing in particular. But if I don't process my anger and I push it down or I let it explode, it's going to hurt somebody, and that's not good. And so processing it before it becomes toxic and poisonous is key. When we push it down, it takes a septic state, and it's not good for us. So anger, here's the thing, right? Anger is never supposed to be a final destination. It's not something we're just going to go and end in anger. Instead, when we're angry, we need to approach anger properly so that will shape where we'll end up going. So anger is not a final destination. We shouldn't think of it as this place we're afraid to go. Instead, we should process it properly, and we're going to go to a good place and where we need to be. Anger is a scary stage because there's a lot of lack of control going on when we feel angry. We're not even in control of ourselves, and that scares us even more. And so that being said, we need to give this to God. And it might look like this, right? It might start with these kind of guttural, instinctual prayers when we're hurting. Like, God, why am I so angry? Lord, show me how to move through this and towards healing. God, I need you to show me and what to say and what not to say, who to forgive and what to let go. And this is difficult. It's challenging. So what I want to do for the rest of my time here this evening is I want to take a look at some of the forms anger can take. The first form that anger can take, it can look like irritation. You think of irritation, when I was looking up irritation in scripture, most of the times you see the word irritation, it's talking about, a skin rash or a skin disease, right? So picture just being irritated and itchy, right? That's kind of where we are on the human level when we're irritated. We're just kind of itchy. We're frustrated. We're getting kind of not fun to be around. Everything's kind of ticking us off. Psalm 37:8 says it this way: refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret. It only leads to evil. So fretting when you're angry looks like irritation. Irritation is an annoyance that you can't seem to get rid of, and it's in the process of making you fully angry. So what's irritating you? It's the first question we need to ask ourselves when we're feeling irritable. What's irritating me? Is it another person, or is it me that's irritating? I'm irritated with myself for how I can't deal with how this other person's acting. So we have to ask ourselves the question, is it them or is it me? If it's them, I need to figure out how to let it go because I can't change them. Maybe I can tell them, hey, that's annoying me, but we can do that in love and not unleash on somebody. But if it's me, why am I so easily irritated by this person? What in me is causing me this kind of a reaction? Whereas maybe last week when I wasn't going through this thing, I could just shrug that off and it was no big deal. Tracking back where the irritation is coming from. More than likely, there's an irritation within you that's really amplifying how this person or this event is irritating you. So grief is often the reason why we're irritated. When you're irritated, first step, breathe. Breathe. And we say that a lot in here, but it's true. We need to take a breath. We need to reset ourselves. We need to do some practical things to kind of get back to a place where we can approach what we're going through with a level head. And I think practically speaking, we talked about some of this in the interview with Rachel, right? Reading your Bible, getting away, maybe stepping outside. We have an awesome porch swing in our backyard that's covered in grapevines. It's awesome. One of my favorite places to go. Sit on the swing, catch my thoughts. I usually need a glass of water that helps lower my body temperature and just kind of collect my thoughts. Maybe read my Bible, maybe journal, maybe watch a podcast, anything just to kind of get to the right place. Jesus was the expert at this. He would daily set aside time for himself to go be with God, to connect with God, to be silent, to be in prayer. And we think it's just Jesus was really good at spiritual disciplines and he knew how to connect with the Father. True, not untrue. But what if he was just getting irritated with the disciples and he needed to go reset himself? We don't know that for a fact, but it could be. They were pretty stubborn. And so there's times where the people we're with is not an excuse to just stew in our anger. So we need to figure out how to work through it. That person might just be the thorn in our paw, so to speak, that's showing us we got an issue we got to deal with. But actually removing that and getting to the deeper issue is harder. So the second way anger can look, it can look like irritation. It can also look like frustration. When we're frustrated, it can just take on a next level. We can be really, really just ready to blow at any time kind of deal. Self-awareness is key. Being aware of frustration, being aware of what it is that's frustrating you. It's good to know, and sometimes it's good to warn the people around you, to simply say, hey, I want you to know I'm frustrated. I don't know why, but I am, and I'm working on that right now. It's not an excuse to dump that on somebody and say, well, I'm frustrated, and it's because of you, and it's your fault, and you figure it out. No, that's not going to help. But if you can, with a calm head, say, hey, I'm frustrated. I don't want to be frustrated. I'm working on it, but I just thought I would let you know I'm a little grumpy right now. It's just, again, it's not an excuse to keep being grumpy, but it's a good way to let somebody know you're aware of it. You know what's going on and you're working on it. Our tone of voice is a key way our frustration comes out. Sometimes I will not know I'm frustrated till I hear myself say something to someone. All of a sudden, it came out really sharp, really abrasive. And I'm like, whoa, what in the world's going on? I'm frustrated. And you always take ownership for that. You say, I'm sorry. That was not fair of me to come at you that way. But it is a good time to kind of catch yourself and say, whoa, I need to deal with this now before it becomes a major problem. There's certain times where it's right to be frustrated, right? Where someone said something that's not cool and you need to stand up for that, or you need to kind of take a stand, and you can voice the frustration, but you can do it in love. Because they said something that frustrated you, it's not an excuse to empty the clip on them, right? To just go at them and unleash. Remember, don't give full vent to your anger. That's not helpful. That's not something that is going to really help you process anger, and it's definitely not going to feel good for that other person. So that verse is Proverbs 29:11. I'll read the whole thing here. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. Like I said, anger is my issue. So there are moments where definitely, I did not respond the way that I should have responded. I need to be humble. I need to be humble and identify that. And then I also need to be aware enough to know it's coming from somewhere. Where is it coming from? How can, as Rachel said, how do I track my thoughts back to feel where is the root of this thing? Where is it coming from? And how do I get on the process of moving through it and past it? I think, in the middle of our anger, frustration, if gone untapped and undealt with, is where anger builds and builds and builds. The key is to not give full vent, but identify what you can do about it, right? What can I control about this situation that I'm frustrated with? What can I not control? And then how do I have the wisdom to know the difference between the two? Right? That's kind of a retelling of our prayer we do, our serenity prayer we do when we meet for CR. But it's true, right? And if you really were honest, you would see the list of things you can control and the list of things you can't. It's a lopsided thing. Most things you can't control. And that's where my anger really is a struggle. It's not the things I can control that I do wrong. It's the things I have no control over that I let get to me and I let bother me and I let haunt me. So how can I realize, all right, the things that I can't control, I need to give to God. I need to give them over to Him. And the things I can control, I need to quit being lazy and I need to deal with it. And I need to be humble and I need to be honest. So anger can also look like blame. And blame is an interesting phrase, right? It's an interesting word, and it has external and internal ramifications in our life. Externally, right, it looks like blame. It's when we're mad, we're angry, so we blame another person for hurting us or for making us feel angry. And when we do this, I always have this image of a blame thrower. It's not flamethrower, but blame thrower, where we just spread around the blame to as many people as we can, because if we just light them up with blame, we don't have to feel any of it on ourselves. And so what blame is actually doing is it's blinding us to what we can control. What we can do, or actually what we need to change in our lives. So if I can just remind you constantly what you are doing wrong and what you need to change, then I don't ever get to looking at what I need to change. And that's not helpful. Now, internally, blame looks like self-pity. And where we feel like somebody hurt us, so we just kind of go into this place of self-pity and we close them off. And so what we're doing there, where blame is blinding us to the things we can change, that we need to change in our lives, what self-pity does is it blinds us to what other people around us need, because it's just about our needs. And we go, with Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, how they go to Never Never Land. They go to this place where they don't have to ever grow. They don't have to ever grow up. They don't ever have to move forward. We do that with victim land, where we are a victim. So if I just stay in victim land, I never have to move forward. I can just stay here in self-pity. And that's not helpful. And yes, if you're a victim of something, that's a real thing. And my heart goes out to you, and that's not fair. It's not fair that you went through that. But staying in victim land won't help you grow. It just won't. Take a minute, take some time to process it, but then move forward and allow God to be into your process to help you move forward. And then we blame ourselves. Sometimes we blame ourselves for whatever that thing is we're mourning. We blame what we did or didn't do to contribute to it. Sometimes we just blame ourselves and we're mad because we're angry. I'm angry because I'm angry. And we do that. We do that a lot. We're upset that we're not moving faster through the grieving process. I hear this one a lot. Like, I should be past this. Yeah, but you're not, and it's okay. And you will be past it as soon as you just enter into the process with God and allow Him to heal you at His time. It's the process. We can't speed through it. We can't just get to the end. You can't just read the last page of a book and know everything in between. You might know the end, but you might not know how we got there. And that's important when you're processing grief, to go through the process. And during this, again, not a comfortable stage, we need to trust God during it. Proverbs 3 says this. I love this. I believe this is the Passion Translation. It says, trust in the Lord completely. And do not rely on your own opinions. With all your heart, rely on him to guide you, and he will lead you in every direction you make. Become intimate with him in whatever you do, and he will lead you wherever you go. Trusting God. The anger stage is where we really struggle to trust God. It's where we really struggle because we don't feel any control, and we just feel mad, angry, frustrated, irritated, sometimes guilty. Anger can look like guilt. You know, shame and guilt are never God's way of dealing with things. These are tools that Satan likes to wield. He likes to tell us that we're a disgrace. He likes to heap on the shame, the guilt. You didn't do enough. You could have saved him and you didn't. All these things that aren't true, right? Satan feeds those to us. And God, instead of using guilt, instead of using shame, God uses grace. And sometimes conviction, but a whole lot of grace. You see, grace is the antidote to shame and guilt. God offers it to us, but we have to receive it. We have to open it. We have to deal with it. We have to open it and accept it and allow it to be part of who we are. It belongs to you as a gift from God, even if you don't feel you deserve it. Grace has never been about deserving it, because we don't. We don't deserve it by our own merit, but we get it because of Christ's merit, because of what he did on the cross. Grace isn't something you earn. It's a gift that allows you to heal if you're only open to it and open to experience it fully in your life. John 1:16 says it this way, and now out of his fullness we are fulfilled, and from him we receive grace heaped upon more grace. I love those words. Grace heaped upon more grace. Finally, anger can take the form of anxiety. And we've talked quite a bit about anxiety in these sessions. But I just want you to remember to surrender those anxieties that you feel to God. Know you're going through them and know you're not alone. But give them over to God. Allow him into your process of dealing with anxiety. For many of us, anxiety is chronic. Anxiety is something that's not a daily occurrence. It's an hourly occurrence. It's heavy. No one knows the war that wages in our mind, but God does. God does, and he knows how to help you in the trenches. So surrender to him. Trust him. Anxiety can make us irritable. Anxiety can cause us to spiral in our anger. And a lot of that anxiety is that internal anger where we're blaming ourselves, like Rachel talked about earlier. Surrendering those anxieties that are making us angry and holding us captive is key. You know, cast your anxieties on Jesus, for he cares for you. He cares about you, and he's actively caring for you. Philippians 4:6-7. I read this in the Passion Translation today, and this is one of those verses I could say, completely from memory, because it talks about not being anxious and trusting God and praying and letting the peace of God, fill us to the brim. But here's how the Passion Translation says it. I love this. Don't be pulled in different directions or worried about a thing. Be saturated in prayer throughout each day, offering your faith-filled requests before God with overflowing gratitude. Tell him every detail of your life. Then God's wonderful peace that transcends human understanding will make the answers known to you through Jesus Christ. Saturated in prayer. And so that's what I would hope you would do with your anger. Saturated in prayer. Give it to God. Allow him to just come in and do some heart work. Tell him every detail of your life, even the angry details you tell no one that you're afraid of getting out. He cares and is caring for you. Let him work through your anger with you. I had this image I just want to leave you with of when we have knots all over our body, right? We need to go get a massage. And I wish I had more access to getting massages than I do. But if you go in and get a massage, you usually have a knot, right? And a good masseuse will not just tippy-toe around the knot. They'll work through it. They'll work it out. They'll help you push through pain at times and really clear out that thing that's causing issues in your body. And once they are able to break up the lactic acid that's causing the knot, it allows your blood to flow the way it should again and your body to function properly again. But sometimes we have ancient pain in our bodies, and we need a step more. We need physical therapy to help us to constantly attend to the stress and the pain that we're carrying in our bodies. And sometimes that's where we are with our anger. We need more than just a massage every once in a while. We need to do some deep tissue physical therapy for our anger. And if that's you, don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of your anger. And I know it's not fun to go there, but it's until we go there, you won't get relief. And at first, it might hurt. But if God can work through those knots and those struggles and those hangups in your life, it'll allow that anger to process through you so you can again have joy in your life and move to the next stage. And in your process, you have to cast your cares on him. God cares for you so deeply. Thank you for joining us tonight. Let me close us in prayer tonight. God, as we think of what everyone's going through right now, the grief processes that are happening actively, God, this anger stage is a complicated one, God. We try to push it down and avoid it, but God, it doesn't work that way. We need to process through our anger so we can realize why we're angry and realize how we can move towards joy. God, be in our process. Be our physical therapist. Be our masseuse. Get all of those knots out of us. And yeah, we know it won't be comfortable, God, but we know you're good and we trust you. And Lord, I pray for everyone in this place that's hurting, anyone who is hearing this message that need to be reminded, God, that they are not alone, that you are with them, you are for them, and you will continue your good work in them till the day of completion in Christ Jesus. And it's in that name we pray. Amen. Well, thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next time.